So this is my evaluation for media studies AS level to do with the production of a music magazine. So question 1, in what ways does your media product use, develop or challenge forms and conventions of real media products? So to start, conventions are features of media text which often appear and are often used which relate to specific genres, an example being placing a masthead behind a model on a cover page of a magazine, horror films containing gore and weapons, violence, things like that. And it's also what relates as often appearable in certain media texts in general. So when it came to observations, I observed and analysed several magazine covers, contents pages and double page spreads, just in order to gain like a form of inspiration and a better understanding as to how and what makes these pages look professional. In particular, the main focus was on the cover pages conventions, as these conventions are directly presented to the audience, like on newsstands, shelves. So as a result, in order to immediately attract audience members, conventions and unique selling points had to be considered, not only to support conventions but also to challenge them in order to stand out, especially in such a big market where there are so many magazines on shelves. So whatever really stands out, it would get the attention of the consumers, just so that you increase revenue, just so that they're able to see it and it stands out, so they can choose that over others, especially in such a competitive market. So I was focusing on the micro levels, like font size, poses of the model, the size and fonts of cover line text, locations of barcodes, skylines, background colours, and magazine puffs. And the contents page, double page spread, I was acknowledging the layout, placement of images, colour schemes again, and use of language, which I'll talk about later on. I decided on focusing on these micro features in order to link to the greater picture of the macro features such as audience, maybe uses and gratifications theory, institutions, conventions, and that'll be talked about later on. So in terms of following conventions, I feel that it was quite successful. With the examples of pre-existing electro magazines, which I'll show you now on screen, there are a range of conventions that have been used across them. So the first example is Synth magazine. So that uses a masthead which has been positioned behind the artist's head, and it also occupies most of the upper page space. And this is also the case, you can see here, with Electro magazine in terms of the sizing of the masthead, but here just the masthead doesn't necessarily remain behind the artist. But I decided to follow Synth and many other genres of magazines where they put the artist in front of the masthead, just because it represents the artist as more like an assertive and dominant figure. The masthead, I guess the masthead represents the overall media industry, and an institution based on music which requires the artists in order for them to actually exist and produce content on a daily basis, weekly basis. Therefore, as the artist is positioned in front of it, the audience can infer that the artists are the ones who provide the inspiration for these magazines to actually exist. Therefore, should be positioned close to the audience, as they should receive greater attention and greater recognition based on them being such iconic figures. And it also presents who the magazine is focusing on this edition, so the audience will be aware straight away, which can increase, make them feel enticed to buy it, because if it attracts them, because they'd like to learn more about the artist, or they know the artist and want to relate to them on a social level, which I'll talk about later in terms of the uses and gratifications theory. I also followed the conventions of cover lines, which were of the same font and size, but with a variation in colour, just so that you could separate each of the lines and understand easily which ones are individual, if they may be linked. So what I challenged though were the conventions of Electro magazine, followed by like inserting cover lines of the same colour. That was and both thirds of the page. It's, you know, it kind of occupied too much space, and it just seemed all over the place and too much for the audience to have to process instantly, because it's, you know, hard to separate as well. But what I did was I decided to leave my cover lines all on the left third of the page, and in separate colours and the same font, just so that it's much easier to look at the main points what the magazine focuses on, rather than giving it all away at the start. Because people, if they want to discover more, they need to look inside and actually buy it. Yeah, and the use of the colours, they definitely made it easier to understand. There were separate points and separate artists being presented. On the other hand, I did follow the skyline convention of Electro, just like a form of commentary, just so that it engages the audience to understand what the magazine is focusing on and what it discusses, just so that if they're new to the market, in terms of they're new to buying the magazines, and they see a magazine, they don't know what it's about, as long as it's on the top skyline, as long as it talks about what's mainly involved, at least they'll feel more enticed to buy it, because they have a better understanding what's actually in it. On the other hand, there is one particular convention which I challenged between all these magazines. So for costume, especially for Electro, they tend to wear like leather jackets, leather shoes, shiny clothing, and like futuristic, really colourful outfits. But what I did was I decided to challenge this by using like a shirt and a jersey together, because, you know, it made the artist look quite cool, quite trendy, especially with the sunglasses as well. I use sunglasses which relate to like the 90s with like the bands like Depeche Mode, just to make it hit the artist seem a bit more old school. And yeah, it made him look really trendy, but also made him look quite mysterious, because you can't make eye contact with him like directly, and it's quite intimidating, which makes the audience feel more enticed to learn about who this person is in the article. And yeah, the clothing gave a much more modern approach, like entices the audience to purchase it, because it's like a new trend. People think that if he's looking different to what the general conventions are of people wearing like leather jackets and all them clothes, based on like the uses and gratifications theory, the consumers would purchase a magazine in order to gain information about new social trends, such as the clothing, new social trends, new ideas about the artist being like a revolutionary figure, which is talked about in his article about like trying to bring back old school Electro, like Depeche Mode, with which relates with the glasses as they used to wear them. So it links back to the historical figures of the genre. And yeah, especially if these are people who've grown up listening to Electro, at least they can, you know, they could get a modern and old school approach, which entices them to buy the magazine, because obviously they've been growing up, you know, times are changing, but they still want to maybe relate to their past. And this, you know, could give, in a way, pleasure, because they if they are able to understand what modern trends are, at least they can follow this trend and feel pleasure out of it, because they feel like socially accepted, in contrast if they didn't buy the magazine and weren't aware of times changing, which made them feel excluded from being involved in the whole idea of the music industry's like genre and fan club, let's say. So yeah, this actually assists their social reputation, maybe, and makes them feel overall more like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. They feel more involved and have a better self-esteem because they feel more socially accepted, more recognised because of their behaviour. And also, what was an arguable parody of the genre was the use of sunglasses, which I spoke about before, because they're often used like the 90s, older school electro time period. Electro was massive, like Depeche Mode, for example, when they used that. As a result, this sort of mocks modern day costume as though it's not as good and not as classy as olden days. You know, and this link the sunglasses to older fashioned bands, it just shows how such iconic people like inspired modern day music, and it shows how this artist in particular is like implementing these old fashioned trends in order to gain recognition for the old fashioned like time period, as there was such great assistance as to how music evolved today, basically. Now, to be honest, I've been talking a lot about the conventions and forms which appear for the cover page. So now I'm going to talk a bit about the contents page and double page spread. So with the contents page, with this example here, there's a clear title at the top of contents, clearly showing that to the audience. Then there's a main image, and this occupies most of the space just to indicate who's the main icon, let's say, who the edition is focusing on, which is what I followed this convention for my contents page, by inserting the image of the model on the more central towards the left third of that page, and it occupied most of the space. And then, as you see with this example, I followed this convention with the text on the right third, and I hope this was quite appealing. I included sound bars on the right, to separate each sentence, just so that it's not only visually noticeable that they are distinguishing points and distinguishing page locations, but also to make it seem more aesthetically pleasing, just because it seems more colourful and it actually links to the genre, which is like I feel quite a modern touch as well, which is very linkable to the target audience. I'm sure they'd find that very appealing. There's a clear distinction between the pages. They're bold, the text is bold to show the pages, make them stand out. But on the top left third of the page, I included the logo, like the conventions of other magazines, and I included a website link, which is often the case on magazines. Maybe not necessarily a convention for contents page, like usually it's on the cover page where there's like a website link, but there's also it says subscribe now, so it's just something to allow the audience to look at and think, if it was good enough, okay, I should subscribe to it. So it's just another way of making it easier for the consumers to actually continue purchasing, let's say, for the business side of it. On my contents page on the right, there's a black, purpley black sort of there's a rectangle to separate each part of the page, where the text is included, with a big bold line at the top, like this week, just to make it stand out and seem more neat as well. Like, it adds more colour to it and it makes it seem neat, which is what would please and support electro audience, because nowadays electro music, because it uses computers, it's very precise. You know, it's much more accurate in terms of sound in contrast to physically playing like guitars. So I'm sure that the expectations of the audience with demographics, they'd expect things to be very neat, very tidy, very intact, and very well cued. And this links to the physical side of it, which I guess arguably is better suited to the electro audience, just because they're, as I said, they're more used to neater and tidier sound, which should relate to presentation as well. But that's just a bit of an analysis. It's debatable, it's not true necessarily, but that's just what I think. And in the background as well, which I'll talk about more detail in the question 2 in terms of mise en scène. The background was a club ambience, which in terms of lighting and the DJ mixer, which links very closely to the genre, and this follows a convention because there's usually the equipment and the setting, which is relatable to the artist and the genre, which is found in most music magazines. So I followed this convention just because it's something which gives an insight to the audience and can entice them to buy the magazine, because it's actually something which they can gain a better understanding and actually understand better what necessarily the setting of the music relates to, and what it entails in terms of the atmosphere it's relatable to. Yeah, and this could eventually, especially for newer audiences, people who just started listening to electro, now they understand where it's best. It's best, which is debatable. It's best where it's best suited to listen to the sound to, like clubs, for example, with really loud music and lights, which add to the excitement. And now finally with the double page spread. So here's one from like an electro, sort of techno electro magazine, which features Daft Punk. Now, there are quite a few examples. I'll show you. So as you can see here, there is, the main image. It occupies like most of the space. Most of it's toward the left page. Some of it extends to the second page, and this straight away identifies who the magazine's focusing on, what the article's related to. And I followed this convention in terms of the big image, and this this shot here is close to a close-up, which is what I used just to display the facial expressions of the artist, so that the audience could interpret their message in a way through music based on the NVC, which will be spoken about in the question 2 in a lot more detail. Yeah, so here they've got the name there, Daft Punk, underneath, just to identify to those who aren't aware of Daft Punk, identify who they are, which is what I've done in a way. I kind of challenged this, also supported it, because I used a signature, which is adds a personal touch, so the artist is actually writing something like a mark. It's his mark which he's giving to the audience, as though he's shows his dignity and in a way humility, as though showing that what he does, all the marks he makes on people, is to suit the interests of people, and to make them feel happy with music, rather than just be making music just for money and greed. He's actually open to the public, and that is actually happy for their support, so that it's like a more personal touch, just so that the audience feel accepted, as though it's a good choice to listen to the music, because they feel like they're gaining respect from the artist, because they're supporting him. What I challenged was with text. The text on the right page is really small in this example, but very nicely laid out. It seems very neat, and in 90-degree angles, and it looks very straight. And what I challenged was the size of the text. I just thought, the size of the text is really small. It's hard to read. Maybe for old school electro fans who may be getting a bit older and may not necessarily be able to read the writing as clearly as the newer, younger generation of fans. But what I did in my example was I with text, I pull out a quote, just like relates to a quote in the article, to give a gist of what the article's about, like to do with rebelling, especially rebelling, where it says enough is enough. Like a stand against certain oppression, let's say, in the industry. And the text is reasonably sized, and it's surrounding an image of sound bars, which I put there, I edited and put there, which I felt made it nice and neat, but also gave it a bit of colour as well, rather than just plain white. It gave it a bit of colour, which links to the colours produced by the electric sound bars on like DJ mixers, just to relate to the genre a lot more. And also it was in a way also laid out in squares to fully surround the bars, which added to the neatness, and that will be spoken about in terms of the interpretations and meanings in question 2. In terms of the pull-out quote, I surrounded it with red and blue boxes, and this was like a personal touch because when they used to be like in cinemas or technological televisions, there used to be 3D glasses with blue and red on them, and because it was such a futuristic idea, I thought, as it relates to electronics, it links very closely to this technology, so I thought that it would suit the technological standards of the genre, hence why I put that there, just to make it seem a lot more colourful and a lot more bolder in a way, and less plain, to be honest. And on the left, the main image, I'm showing the artist with sunglasses, surrounded by the ambience of lighting in the club, basically, just to make it seem more realistic as to the natural atmosphere for electro to be heard, and just so that the audience can gain a better understanding, just like the contents page is where it's most appropriate maybe arguably to listen to the music. And this was all edited, like the glasses, I used Photoshop to lower the opacity and fit the size of the glasses, and make it seem like it was actually, the artist was actually immersed in this environment, just so how intense the lighting is, which causes excitement, to be honest. A lot of people find it exciting to be in such loud and colourful environment, especially for electro, but there's a lot of that involved. And this in a way adds pleasure, because the audience begin to feel excited as to what to expect if they were to fulfill certain trips to clubs, and to gain a better understanding. So this adds excitement, something to look forward to, especially social excitement, because they'll be in a club with loads of people, and it makes them think this could actually be a really good genre to listen to for their self-esteem and social reputation. And at the bottom of the article, if I can zoom in there, if it's not too illegible, I related to other artists, just as a form of parody, to show that the artist is trying to stand against mainstream artists, because he finds them too obsessive in terms of electro music, constantly having loud beats and climax sounds, which are always ongoing in loads of modern songs. So it's just a way of suggesting that he's trying to revolt against such conventions and challenge them by creating original music. And it even says that he likes the style of Depeche Mode, and he despises David Guetta, you know, them sort of, I think Calvin Klein as well, just to show that his approach to electro is different, which will be analysed in question 2. So yeah, thank you for watching. This is question 1, and I'll be making question 2 shortly. Thank you.